Aren't you like a lover? Should I put out the lights? Well, I'm already running from you. Out of the blue, I'm dealing with things that are bigger than me and you. Well, I'm already running from you. Out of the blue, I'm dealing with things that are bigger than me and you. Yeah.
Wow, we're off to just the races. Sorry. Normally, I have a producer who helps me with these sorts of things, and I decided I'd try to wing it, and I thought I'd do okay. But when I do these releases throughout the week, kind of unannounced, and it's just a out-of-the-blue live stream, it's because I have good information to bring you. Now, I'm going to go right into it with what I have now because it's not something you're going to want to miss. The PCR test, I've known for a long time, is problematic. But sometimes in English media, Canadian media, just all over the world, we miss things that are in different languages that are important and have bearing on what we're going through here. And in this case, I think we missed something in March of 2020 with a German physician, this man named Wolfgang Wodarg. There's some arguments out there, some people attacking him, but most of the arguments are that he's out to lunch because he attacked the PCR Corman-Drosten protocol. But we'll go through some information that you're not going to want to miss, and you may have not heard it anywhere else. Specifically, I have the FDA document that shows that PCR tests can pick up other bacteria and pathogens and include that as a positive test. So now I'm going to couple that with what this German physician has to say and hope that this will all make sense for you, why it is so important, why we can't miss things like this in the media and let it just be dismissed. So here we are. I'll go into our article released today. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, you can check it out after this live video here. Please share this out. German physician calls COVID-19 hype and an alleged epidemic. He formerly ran his own hospital with flu diseases monitoring systems. Now, pull this up here. Sorry, everyone. I keep forgetting that I am the producer this time around. So here's the article here, Diverge Media. Check it out. Make sure you share it. Now, in a interview with Oval Media, he said he was in charge of a area of 150,000 people that had its own flu/disease monitoring network. And he said, I would like to tell you something about the coronavirus epidemic that we are allegedly having right now. This was in March of 2020. Again, I want to reiterate that. It was missed. But I think this is important. In March, he was sounding the alarm. And this was somebody else who sounded the alarm in swine flu, as you are about to hear. He said, I would like to tell you something about the coronavirus epidemic that we are allegedly having right now. First, I thought this hype is going to end again because he spoke out against the swine flu. He thought the hype was going to end again like it did with swine flu, but it has increased so much, he said, and we finally have to start taking a closer look. Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg first became prominently known across the world when he accused the manufacturers of flu drugs and vaccines of influencing the World Health Organization's decision to declare a pandemic. In a 2010 article with the Daily Mail, Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg said in order to promote their patented drugs and vaccines against the flu, pharmaceutical companies have influenced scientists and official agencies responsible for public health standards to alarm governments worldwide. He continued, they have made them squander tight healthcare resources for inefficient vaccine strategies and needlessly exposed millions of healthy people to the risk of unknown side effects of insufficiently tested vaccines. So this sounds eerily similar to the strategy we are facing today. Now, Why do I say that? The strategy we're facing today. Now, just because there is a vaccine that's approved, everybody goes, look, it's approved. It's great. It's fantastic. Yes, technically it's approved, but it was approved skipping animal testing and going to emergency approvals. Now, this is his point. They did the same thing. This was the playbook for swine flu when it happened. They did the same thing, and he said it was to push their vaccines and their drugs. And the side effects were insufficiently known. We don't know what the long-term side effects are. It sounds eerily similar. So what did he have to say about COVID in particular? Let's go back. He said in his interview with Oval Media on March 13th of 2020, again, missed, but it lines up with something somebody else has said. Independent MPP Randy Hillier has had issue with the Corman-Drosten PCR protocol and wrote about this, as we wrote about in his letter, requesting an investigation into scientific fraud in public health policies. This was something that was a sticking point for Mr. Hillier on the PCR test, and that it was, he believes, to be fraudulent. And I have to agree with him, knowing what I know now. What did he say? He said, he had great concerns about the Corman-Drosten PCR protocol. And this echoes, obviously, Randy Hillier. He said, in the letter, Mr. Hillier said, the Corman-Drosten protocol was submitted to the WHO on January 13th, 8 days prior to the date. It was submitted to the medical journal Eurosurveillance for peer review. The WHO released the Corman-Drosten protocol on January 21st. The same day it was submitted to Eurosurveillance. Drosten also sits on the board of Eurosurveillance, a conflict of interest. So that's what Hillier, he points out there was a conflict of interest. It was submitted to the WHO on 13th of January, 8 days prior to the day it was submitted to Eurosurveillance. So the WHO says you should use this one, Corman-Drosten protocol. And they send it off to Eurosurveillance, who Drosten sits on the board of. This is your PCR test that's being predominantly used. Now, back to Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg. Said, I quote, I worked as a doctor and conducted a health department. I had my own Sentinel, my own monitoring system for flu diseases. Every year I observed how many people became sick in an area of 150,000 inhabitants. Every new year worldwide, we have new types of viruses because the viruses have to change themselves. Yes, this is common sense. When it comes to the viruses, we know that they change because why? They want to infect other people. And he says exactly this. He says if the same viruses just came back again in the next year, our immune system would recognize them so that they would not be able to make us sick or to multiply, which is what they want. He went on to explain what he believes transpired to create the hype around COVID-19. And this is where I decided I have to write an article about this because I didn't know about this man and slipped by, and it got the gears turning. And I will explain, hopefully coherently, why this matters to me after we get through the information. He said there are about 100 different types of viruses that are changing constantly. Up till now, we didn't really care which viruses caused this flu or disease or however you want to call it. But there have been investigations over several years in Glasgow. They tried to use the available tests. That means they didn't examine all 100 types, but just the ones they had test for. So they looked at maybe 8 or 10 different viruses, and coronaviruses have always been part of them. Okay, remember that. Coronaviruses have always been part of them. Listen to that. Remember that. Dr. Wodarg goes on to describe the figures. The coronaviruses normally make up 7 to 15%, maybe 5 to 14%. It always fluctuates a bit. Hence, it's just normal that a big part of viruses are coronaviruses. He then goes on to describe how he believes we got to the current situation. So the following happens. In Wuhan, there is the biggest safety laboratory for viruses in the whole of China. So there are a lot of experts on the topic dealing with it all day long. Wuhan is a big city, has 11 million inhabitants. Big hospitals, big intensive care units, always people being ventilated, people with pneumonia, 100 of them, and they did tests with a few patients, less than 50. They looked for the viruses that they had examined, the RNA in the laboratory, and found a new type. Okay, so this attracted their attention. When a virologist finds something like this, he puts it in a global database. And this data is accessible for scientists all over the world. In Berlin, for example, Germany, where he's from. In Berlin, they checked and compared this new entry and tried to create a test to measure this new variant of coronavirus. And this is where the Corman-Drosten protocol is an issue again. Then Mr. Drosten submitted a protocol to the WHO and got it admitted really quickly. So this German physician who was in charge of monitoring the diseases of 150,000 people and taking care of them, he also noticed that the WHO submitted the Drosten protocol very quickly, just as our independent MPP Randy Hillier outlines in his expedited letter for an investigation into scientific fraud and public health policies on the same exact issue. That's why it matters. Sorry, long-winded, but back to it. So then Mr. Drosten submits the protocol, and it got admitted really quickly. Usually, a test is considered a product of medicine. What does that mean? It has to be validated. That means it has to be checked very precisely. What does this test actually say? What does it measure? The mentioned test is an in-house test developed in the Charité clinic. But because there weren't any validated tests, and the great panic arose. I love that he says this. The great panic arose. Isn't that the truth of the matter? Doesn't that just describe perfectly what happened when all this went down? The great panic arose, and it was decided to just use this test everywhere. And then Mr. Drosten provided the test. So Corman Drosten gets provided everywhere. It's a very problematic PCR protocol test, and outlined in Mr. Hillier's independent letter backed by some experts in the field and security, virologists. You go look at that out, check that out on our site, divergemedia.ca. Look up Randy Hillier. You'll find him there. We've covered that letter. It's available for you there to look more in depth. But here we are. They're saying the same things about the Corman Drosten protocol. So he says, well, you're looking for a specific virus, for example. He goes, you can only say one is different or we have the test for this, but how dangerous is it, Mr. Drosten? This is what he said. How is he supposed to know? He would need further epidemiological data based on observations of how sick people are. How do they get fast? How healthy do they get fast again? And now we have the data and we know it's much less deadly. This is all the way back in March. He's saying this. He's like, listen, you don't even have the data to make an assessment on whether or not there should be concern. You just created a test to detect something. So how would you know? And so while looking for a specific virus, for example, the coronavirus, you can examine the total population. What you will find is that presumably around 8 or 10% of the population will have some kind of virus that makes them sick. But if you examine the medical practices, do your test there to determine who is sick, then of course you would find a lot more positive cases. And if you examine hospitals and take samples there, you would find even more corona-infected people. And what are we doing? All the testing, lots of testing in hospitals, lots of testing in clinics, testing everywhere we can. Let's find as many cases as we can. That is to say that depending on what proportions of the population you examine, whether it is the whole of the population, patients in the waiting room, people in clinic, or very ill patients in the intensive care unit, about that, you expectedly find that 7 to 15% of these people have coronaviruses every time you do a test. Now, why does that matter? Because the PCR test with the Corman Drosten protocol that we've covered, share it out to your friends, everyone. Here's the FDA document. Okay, so you don't believe me here. I have it linked in this article for you so you can show all of your friends. This is done. Okay, I'm at the point now where people are starting to wake up and it's beginning to get easier for me to be bold. And sometimes I tell people, they get angry. We go, why don't you talk about this? Why don't you talk about that? And I'll tell you the truth is sometimes people aren't ready to hear it. But now people are getting more vocal. Now I'm willing to share information a little more unashamedly, a little more abrasively. Here it is. FDA document linked in the article. What do they say on the PCR test? Detection of viral RNA may not indicate the presence of infectious virus or that 2019 nCoV is the causative agent for clinical symptoms. Wait, what? Does that mean the PCR test is basically garbage? Yeah, pretty much. It means that detection of viral RNA, meaning you could get positive tests, and it doesn't mean that you're infectious. That's the first thing it says. Or that SARS-CoV, like the SARS-CoV-19, whatever you want to call it, but they're saying 2019 nCoV infection. They're saying they don't even know for sure from the PCR test that it is the causative agent for clinical symptoms. That means that the performance of this test, and it says the performance of this test has not been established for monitoring treatment, but this is another one. The test cannot rule out diseases caused by other bacterial or viral pathogens. Okay, again, I linked it in the article for you to check out. I apparently took it down off of here, but here, let's click. This will come up. FDA, CDC 2019 novel coronavirus and COVID real-time RT-PCR diagnostic panel. You go down to page 39, or 40 rather, sorry, the beginning of page 40. Here we are. This is where we're getting this information from for everyone listening in. This test cannot rule out diseases caused by other bacteria or viral pathogens. And there we go. It's saying it can pick up. It doesn't indicate that COVID is the causative agent for clinical symptoms, and that viral RNA may not indicate the presence of infectious virus. So it could be picking up dead virus. It could be picking up other virus. It could be picking up completely unrelated things. And then we say it's COVID. And coincidentally, where did the flu go? Coincidentally, the other experts have been pointing out around the world that numbers in other categories for deaths have dropped at the same time COVID's gone up, and they think the numbers coincide pretty closely. But I will find the information on that. I can't say offhand who that is because I can't remember where it is. But this is the stuff I come across, and this is what I know, and these are the conversations that come up. So let's go back here. I guess I'll pull up some comments here to see if I even have anybody commenting. Do we have no comments? No comments. All right. So on the PCR test, there's a German physician saying, listen, if you went to a hospital and you started testing people, you're going to find at any time in a hospital or like a clinical care setting, you're going to find 5 to 14%, 7 to 15%, somewhere in that range of people with coronaviruses. Then people go, whoa, the PCR test is problematic. I knew that. But then it's not just that the PCR test is problematic. You add in what this physician's saying, 7 to 15% in any clinical hospital setting would probably be have a coronavirus in them. Okay, and then the PCR test can pick up other bacteria and pathogens that aren't SARS-CoV-2. So you're basically testing with a thing, amplifying it to stupid high levels so that it can pick up fragments so small so that it could be the flu. You can literally be testing positive for the flu and it says it's a PCR positive. Oh, Greg, you're crazy. No, not at all. And in fact, on the top of my head, I can't think of the article or medical article right now. Maybe my wife can find it. But they tested people that had tested positive for COVID. They ran thousands through to test them for influenza and found that it was a massive amount of them actually had influenza. So we stopped testing altogether for influenza. We have a PCR test that, according to the FDA, right? Again, not my words. This is the FDA.gov. It's a media download. It's about you can look it up yourself. It's also linked in this description below, but it's the novel coronavirus real-time PCR, RT-PCR diagnostic review. And they're telling you it can pick up other things. Doesn't mean you're infectious. And then you learn what we know. As pointed out in the Corman-Drosten protocol, like Mr. Hillier points out, which I will now point from the letter itself. Here we go. Sorry, everyone. This is from Mr. Hillier's letter, linked in our article on divergemedia.ca. The world's predominant, widely inaccurate PCR testing protocols are based on incomplete theoretical genome sequences supplied by China. Virologist Victor Corman and Christian Drosten led the exceptionally rapid creation of the first COVID-19 PCR test, the Corman-Drosten protocol. It is now the most commonly used testing protocol in the world for detecting the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which may in certain cases lead to the disease COVID-19. As discussed, the Court of Appeal of Lisbon concluded that this PCR test was producing as many as 97% false positives, specifically when you cycle it above 35. Corman, and we cycle up to 40 in Ontario, 45 in Quebec, 33 to 45 across Canada. You can find that in our article, PCR bombshell PCR test, widely shared article of ours. Under COVID-related articles, you'll find it there. Okay. Corman and Drosten were provided with the in silico or theoretical genome sequences used to create their PCR protocol by Chinese scientists, including Yang Zheng and Shizheng Li, director at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. These genome sequences were then posted to the open source depository. This is in line with Dr. Wolfgang's version of events, for the record, too. And on January 10th, 2020, the Corman-Drosten protocol was submitted to the WHO on January 13th, 8 days prior to the day it was submitted to the medical journal. The WHO released the Corman-Drosten protocol on January 21st, the same day it was submitted to Eurosurveillance. So that's where that comes from. That's actually Mr. Hillier's letter pointing that out. Of all the 1,595 publications at Eurosurveillance since 2015, not one other research paper was reviewed and accepted in fewer than 20 days, except this one on PCR, except the one on the most important fundamental thing that has been holding us in lockdowns. This PCR test is the key. This is the fundamental tool that they've used to hype this thing, because they can find things that aren't there. They're using crazy. Not only is it like a flawed test that doesn't have a, like the FDA is telling you can pick up other viruses. Not only that, they also amplify it way above the levels that are suggested by even other experts. Other doctors early on in the New York Post were saying 25 to 30 max, and Canada's like, hold my beer, 33 to 45. Let's do it. That's where we're at. So then we have Randy Hillier pointing that out in his letter, that of almost 1,600 publications since 2015, not one of their research papers in Eurosurveillance was accepted in fewer than 20 days. And this one on the PCR Corman-Drosten protocol test for COVID, the whole thing that this whole thing hinges on, it was approved in 8 days. None of them have been approved in 20 days since 2015 of 1,600 articles almost. This one gets approved in 8 days. Coincidental? I don't know. I'll let you make up your mind on that. But that's that. This is that's it in a nutshell. This is important information. The FDA thing, you need to get that information out there. PCR test picks up fragments of other viruses. It can pick up things, and the way we amplify it, it's going to, with how high we amplify, you're picking up other things. And I'm supposed to believe the flu just dropped off the face of the planet. No, you stop testing it like it didn't exist anymore. That's why it dropped off the face of the planet. So this is an important article to get out. It's one of those ones that sometimes it's hard to convey the importance of the article in a title. And so I tried to do something kind of clickbaity, which is why I talked about him saying that COVID-19 is hyped and it's an alleged epidemic. And honestly, it is old news. It was from March. But adding this all together, when he said 7 to 15% in any hospital or like clinical care setting is likely to test positive for a coronavirus, and then you read the FDA document says it can pick up other coronaviruses, other pathogens, other bacteria. Well, what the hell are we doing? I don't know how to sugarcoat this anymore, but this information needs to be shared out. The link is included below on the PCR test. Link the article I wrote today talking about it. The doctor. This is I almost missed the big one. Sorry. On this. Italy. Okay. I'm not blaming China. Everybody likes to blame China for the lockdowns that have hit the entire world. I'm going to take an entirely different view. I'm going to blame Italy. Here's why I blame Italy. There's going to be a piece of information I'm going to show you after this that is going to get the gears turning on the information we just heard. Again, where did they take the test from in Italy? Were they in critical care settings? Italy's to blame because Italy legitimized the Chinese approach. Italy legitimized the fact that locking people down was an appropriate response in a democratic nation to this virus because it was novel and new. In partnership with China, and not that they were actually in partnership, but in partnership with China's propaganda of bolting people inside their homes and welding doors shut, it effectively worked that Italy was the catalyst or the lightning rod for the rest of the world to say, see, they can do it, we can too. I believe Italy is at fault of why we're at lockdown. And here's why it should aggravate you even more. So I came across something today that kind of, it's sometimes, okay, I'll just give it to you straight. Sometimes, Reddit can be absolute garbage, but sometimes you actually see people in there trying to have discussions with other people, trying to be informed, sharing studies, things like that. And I came across a study on flu numbers in Italy. And I think you're going to want to know about this. Now, maybe you've heard about this. I know my audience seems to be up on things before I ever get a whiff of them. And that's often how these stories come to be. So thank you for that and sharing things with me. And it really helps Diverge Media cover the things that slip through the cracks of those stories that matter, like a Dr. Wolfgang. But on this one, Italy, what would you say if I said to you, so China locks down, we know now that the death rates have been drastically overinflated. We know that the PCR test is picking up other pathogens and they're counting those as COVID, on and on the list goes. What would I say to you if Italy, the country that legitimized lockdowns for the rest of democratic nations across the world, had been experiencing excess deaths from influenza for 2013, 2014, 2015, and 2016. And this article was released in 2019. They had more excess deaths than the Second World War. not my words. Let's get into the medical study now and get it into some of the actual writing. Right, here it is. In the International Journal of Infectious Diseases, investigating the impact of influenza on excess mortality in all ages in Italy during recent seasons, 2013 and 2014 to 2016, 2017 seasons. Highlights. More than 68,000 deaths were attributable to flu epidemics were estimated in that study period. Italy showed a higher influenza attributable excess mortality compared to other European countries, especially in the elderly. Okay, now we go to the results. We estimate excess deaths of 7,027, 20,259, 15,801, and 24,981 attributable to influenza epidemics in the 2013, 2014, 2015, and 2016 respectively seasons using the Goldstein Index. The average annual mortality excess rate per 100,000 ranged from 11.6 to 41.2, with most of the influenza-associated deaths per year registered among the elderly. However, children less than 5 years old reported a relevant influenza attributable excess death in 2014 and 2016 seasons, respectively. Conclusions. Over 68,000 deaths were attributable to influenza epidemics in the study period. The observed excess deaths is not completely unexpected given the high number of fragile, very old subjects living in Italy. This is in 2019 this was released. In conclusion, the unpredictability of the influenza virus continues to present a major challenge to healthcare professionals and policymakers. Nonetheless, vaccination remains the most effective, and they go on to say, but that is not what I was looking for. Abstract. Here it is. Hey, everyone. In recent years, Italy has been registering peaks in death rates, particularly among the elderly during the winter season. A mortality rate of 10.7 per 1,000 inhabitants was observed in the winter season 2014-2015, more than 375,000 deaths in absolute terms, corresponding to an estimated 54,000 excess deaths of 9.1% as compared to 2014. This representing the highest reported mortality rate since the Second World War in Italy. So 2016, 2016, I think it is. Highest reported excess mortality rate since the Second World War. And yet, not a mention of this when they talk about the excess deaths that happened in Italy at the beginning of this. So if they're testing for the PCR in Italy, in the retirement homes, in the elder care homes, they're already having prior years. Now, this doesn't mean that in 18, 19, and 2020 that epidemic maintained itself and continued. But that's just to say there was a history there and what it could have came back. And if it was true because there was an elderly and frail population there, could it be that they had worse results and we were using worse results, PCR, and they just did everything they could boost the fear out of Italy, and it legitimized everything across the world? That is what I think happened. Now, it's just absolutely unbelievable when you start going into the medical evidence. But good to see everyone here. Remembering the same people push COVID vaccines are the same. Yeah, it's where we got here. So this is the doctor speaking out against swine flu in 2010. And I think it's important because same motivations exist as they did back then. As bad as it is to think ill of people, there is people that will take advantage if given the opportunity. A resolution proposed by Dr. Warder calling for an investigation into the role of drug firms has been passed by the Council of Europe. We'll go into that next and we'll close out. An emergency debate on the issue will be held later in this month. He claims that it emerged as the British government is desperately trying to offload up to $1 billion of swine flu vaccine ordered at the height of the scare. The Department of Health warned of 65,000 deaths, set up a special advice line and website, suspended normal rules so anti-flu drugs could be given out without prescription, and told health and local authorities to prepare for a major pandemic. Planners were told to get morgues ready for the sheer scale of deaths, and there were warnings that the army could be called in to prevent riots as people fought to obtain drugs. Sound familiar? Okay, they've ran this playbook, it sounds like. But with fewer than 5,000 in England catching the disease last week and just 251 deaths overall, Dr. Wardark has branded the H1N1 outbreak as one of the greatest medical scandals of the century. Now, keep in mind, they weren't testing anywhere near what they are for COVID. 331,000 per million people, or 331,000 per million test. Or people for tests in Canada. Sorry, that was butchered. They nowhere near that with swine flu. Guaranteed they didn't. So of course they couldn't get the numbers up, but they learned from it. They said, we got to test higher. We got to crank that testing, crank. And I think that's what they did. And they cranked the testing, get the fear early. And they know that anchor point of fear is going to be what people remember. They couldn't get it with swine flu. They couldn't get the fear. But they got it with this one. And once they have the foothold, the anchor point in people's minds, it's a lot harder to change opinion. It's a lot easier to fool people than it is to convince them they've been fooled. Now, he said that we have a mild flu and a false pandemic. That's what he said on swine flu. He added that the seeds of the scare were sown 5 years ago when it was feared much more lethal bird flus would mutate into a human form. So they've just been amplifying the same line of thinking. Well, bird flu turned into swine flu, and we knew it was going to get worse because swine flu, it just keeps mutating, and now we got COVID. So this is kind of the line of argument they use, but you can see how it all works together. Dr. Wardark said the governments have sealed contracts with vaccine producers where they secure orders in advance and take upon themselves almost all the responsibility. In this way, the producers of vaccines are sure of enormous gains without having any financial risk. So they just wait until WHO says pandemic and activate the contracts. He also claims that to further their interests, leading drug companies place their people in the cogs of the WHO and other influential organizations. No, a company that wants to make money would never try to put their people in influential positions of other agencies that could cause them to make much more money. That would never happen. Okay. So we continue. He added that their influence could have led to the WHO to soften its definition of a pandemic, leading to the declaration of a worldwide outbreak last June. So they softened their definition of a pandemic. He's saying it could have led to that. Dr. Wardak said, in order to promote their patented drugs and vaccines against flu, pharmaceutical companies have influenced scientists and official agencies responsible for public health standards to alarm governments worldwide. They have made them squander tight health resources for inefficient vaccine strategies and needlessly expose millions of healthy people to the risk of unknown side effects of insufficiently tested vaccines. So there you go. And now he's been making a lot of headway. So if you want to know a little bit more about him, he partnered with the former CEO, I believe, of Pfizer, Dr. Michael Yeadon, and wrote this. This here. Yep. Petition / motion for administrative / regulatory action regarding confirmation of efficacy endpoints and use of data in connection with the following clinical trials. Basically, calling into question the Pfizer trial, specifically BioNTech, and ongoing clinical trials in vaccine candidates designed to stop transmission of the virus from the vaccine recipient to others. So they go on to say, decisions involved, actions requested, stay the phase 3 trial of BNT 162, that's the Pfizer, in the protocol country Germany and in any other EU protocol countries as applicable until study designs is amended to provide that. They want these amendments before an emergency authorization / conditional approval and or unrestricted authorization is issued for the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. All endpoints or COVID-19 cases used to determine vaccine efficacy in the phase 3 or 2-3 trials should have their infection status confirmed by appropriate Sanger sequencing as described in section C. The high cycle thresholds used in some trials and design flaws of certain RT-PCR tests identical to are modeled after what is sometimes called the Drosten test. So basically in these vaccine trials, now they're going even one step further. They're using that Drosten test that can pick up other viruses as confirmation, and they can amplify it at 40 cycles, which is a stupid amount. Less than 3% would actually be infectious with anything. That is what they're using to gauge. Now he points out the issue in that. 2, stay the clinical trials of all vaccine candidates designed to stop transmission of the virus from the vaccine recipient to others and or to prevent and mitigate symptoms of COVID-19, which PCR results and are the primary evidence of infection until study design is amended to provide that. Before an emergency, blah, blah, on and on. Endpoints confirmed by approval and the high cycle used in some trials design. So they don't want that used. They go on, high cycle thresholds or CT values in the test results have been widely acknowledged to lead to false positives. Also, a group of scientists and researchers have recently called for a retraction of the paper that describes the so-called Drosten test. That would be Peter Borger, or Borger. We wrote about him calling that out. That's also linked in the Hillier letter. Hillier refers to his expert opinion calling out the specific issues of the Drosten test. You can look it up in some of our articles, or you can find it in the Hillier letter. All of the positive results are used to categorize patients as COVID-19 cases in the trials and used to qualify the trials endpoints. Should be verified by Sanger sequencing to confirm that tested samples, in fact, contain SARS-CoV-2 genomic RNA, congruent with FDA and EMA requirements. Using PCR, the sequencing must show a minimum of 100 continuous bases matching the reference. So they're giving like an actual, this is the measurement to do it by. It's not being done that way, I guess, now. But this is a wanted man. This is obviously somebody the mainstream media wants to ignore, which is likely why we haven't heard anything reported on it here in Canada. German, you're going to have to translate the article like I did today and go through the information. He's definitely rocked the boat quite a bit, called out the testing on the vaccine, and with the former Pfizer exec, Dr. Michael Yeadon. So crazy. But the takeaway here, if we're going to summarize, okay, it's 2021. We've had a full year. It is not nearly as deadly as it's been made out to be. At the high end, okay, so I've studied the data. I don't just study the things I want to hear. I try to study things I don't believe or I don't want to hear, so I know the full argument. But on the high end, the serological data in Canada is saying 0.8% infection fatality rate. 0.8%. Now, of that 0.8%, this is the high end, right? The low end is like 0.2, but the high end's 0.8. And 0.8 still, it can be an alarming number, but then we need to put that in perspective. 0.8% with 80% of those cases happening in long-term care and retirement homes. If that's the case, then the vast majority of these, we need to ask the question. We're cycling at a level that's above 35 picks, less than 3% are actually going to be infectious. 0.8% is the infection fatality rate. That's the high end. And 80% of those 0.8% are coming from long-term care facilities. Like, do you think this is still a reasonable approach? Now, it feels like it's impossible to get through to anyone with data or evidence or information, because you could hold their hand at this point. It doesn't matter. It's like Yuri Bezmenov, former KGB agent, talked about. It won't be till there's a boot firmly on the throat of the person that they understand what's really happened. You could literally, he says, you could pull somebody by the hand and show them the buildings and the documents and all very official and true, and they still wouldn't believe you. The demoralization that happens, I think we're there. I think Canadians are demoralized. I don't think they can make sense of information anymore. They don't know what to believe. And when I hold their hand, I say, look, here's the FDA document. All it takes is like a Snopes or these agencies to come in and they say, well, a fact check, that's wrong. And people go, well, it's wrong. But then you read it. And I was just reading one on, before I released this paper, I like to make sure, maybe this guy's a quack and I don't want to quote him. So I went out and see what other people are writing about him. That's bad. And basically everything they're hitting this guy on is that the PCR test is great and it's reliable. It's like, are you kidding me? That's what you're going to, so this is insane. Everything has been based on the PCR test. I'm going to pull up one more here on the NEJM on masking. NEJM talisman masking. So all of this has been based on the PCR test, which is based on that Corman-Drosten protocol, which is riddled with issues. None of the Euro surveillance's 1,600 publications, roughly from 2015 to today, have been approved in less than 20 days. This one, that every PCR test is basically based on, that the entire pandemic basically hinges on, it gets approval in less than 8 days. And by the way, the guy who created the test sits on the board at the place that approved it, that peer reviewed it. Then it gets approved. Now that's the test that's being used. And what are we doing? Good point, Greg. The Italians set the precedent. Ron Paul, Liberty point for last week. Tyranny is contagious, but so is liberty. More states are returning to sanity thanks to South Dakota's example. Yes, we have South Dakota. We have Texas. We have Mississippi, last I heard, is mask-free. Listen, the mask is another one. I've talked about this so many times. The Ontario Nursing Association is not going to talk. Listen, they blew the healthcare budget on vaccines that may or may not be needed. They never even once looked into drugs. They could have looked into ivermectin, hydrochloroquine, any number of other drugs to treat it first, and they didn't do that. They blew the budget on vaccines, and now what are they going to do? You have less money for healthcare as a result. If I am the ONA, I'm not going to speak out against the government too much. I'm going to just try not to get my nurses' jobs cut. And nobody's thinking that nurses' jobs are going to get cut in the middle of a pandemic, but you are when you understand we don't really have the money to bankroll all this, and they just billions and billions out the door for vaccines, and it may not have been the best approach. The ONA in 2015, Ontario Nursing Association, 2015, 2018, they went to court and fought and won against mandatory masking, VOM policy, vaccine or mask, at St. Michael's Hospital for nurses that refused the influenza vaccine. They said, listen, I'm not going to do that. There's no proof it's effective in reducing patient or nurse transmission. And they won in court 2015 and 2018. The arbitrator said there wasn't sufficient proof that it protected the nurse or the patient. So that got tossed out. But if I'm them, I'm not going to speak out on this. So we got an Ontario Nursing Association with a court precedent that's not going to speak out against mandatory masking. And the masking is acting as a fear mechanism that just reiterates our draconian, stupid, idiotic approach to dealing with COVID. Hey, let's destroy our future because we could save a couple thousand lives, but we'll destroy millions later, but let's save a couple thousand today. Even if that were true, the utter stupidity of it, you're throwing out the future. It's like, oh, let's throw out the future. I could save a couple thousand today. Might kill millions tomorrow, which is way more than we're going to save. But like, well, we can save a couple thousand today and I can be the hero. That's what politicians are doing today. And they're doing it with the PCR test that has been just bullet holed by experts all over the world for a year. And it's not known to be reliable. Anything over 35, less than 3% chance you're actually infectious. Check out another study if you're new to Diverge Media. I don't know who's in the chat room. Wuhan, roughly 10 million residents tested with the PCR test. Roughly 300 were asymptomatic PCR positives. Of those 300 asymptomatic PCR positives, 0 were actually infectious. 0 were actually viable viruses, meaning able to grow. Why are we wearing masks as asymptomatic people? 10 million people tested, 300 asymptomatic, 0 actually infectious. Get rid of the freaking mask. And you're never talking about the long-term consequences of these actions. What about the effects on the psychology of the adult population and how they interact with each other? What about the effects on children and how they interact with each other? What about the fact that now there might be trust issues. There might be, like, I was talking with a woman who had a son in high school, and it's like, he's not the type to yell. I'm not going to be the type to, and you have to be like that with a mask on. So if I'm a kid that's maybe a little more socially quiet, keep to myself, I'm probably going to have an even harder time getting to know people now at school. And I'm going to be even more concerned about what they think because I can't see the micro expressions on their face and all these things. Did we factor in any of that? No. And what did you want to know what the medical articles were saying about this? Sorry, everyone. What were the medical articles saying about this when this all kicked off? Well, I'll show you. Because again, you can think I'm out to lunch. I really don't care anymore. But universal masking in hospitals in the COVID-19 era. Now they say, well, this is because there was a shortage, so we lied in medical literature because there was a shortage. We had to lie to you. No, that's not true. Okay, May 21st, 2020, this was released early on. And I'm going to go here. It is also clear that masks serve symbolic roles. Masks are not only tools, they are talismans that may increase healthcare workers' perceived sense of safety, well-being, and trust in their hospitals. Although such reactions may not be strictly logical, we are all subject to fear and anxiety, especially during times of crisis. One might argue that fear and anxiety are better countered with data and education than with a marginally beneficial mask, particularly in light of a worldwide mask shortage, but it is difficult to get clinicians to hear this message in the heat of the current crisis. Oh, we just lied because there was a mask shortage. No, they're saying it was it's basically a talisman for anxiety and fear, and that it may give a perceived sense of safety, but that one might argue that fear and anxiety are better countered with data and education. That's what they said. So now we got that. Well, the mask is keeping the fear up. We got a PCR test that's amplified to ungodly levels, 33 to 45 across Canada. And by the way, FDA document says it can pick up other bacteria, other pathogens. It doesn't mean that if you test positive, you're infectious, or that the virus you even tested for was COVID-19. Says that right in the FDA document. But don't worry, you'll find a fact-checked article somewhere from Snopes that probably says that article or that document's out to lunch, and then they'll take some conspiracy theorist who took it out of context and spun it the wrong way, and they'll take his quote and they'll say that's what you're all saying. Yes, but go read it yourself. Fear and trusting the government system. They think that the government would never do that. They are sleeping. And I talk about this a lot with people. Listen, like, you don't want to think that your government, worst case, like, you don't want to think your government made a mistake and that they can't admit that they're wrong and now they're just doubling down. Nobody wants to even think that. And nobody especially wants to think that this is part of a plan. Like, what do you make of, and I'll ask the audience here, but what do you make of the fact that you have Jason Kenney, Premier of Alberta, saying that Klaus Schwab, the president of the World Economic Forum, sent every parliamentarian his book, The Great Reset, right before all this happened at the beginning of it. Okay, so every parliamentarian got it, and part of that Great Reset, they're talking about you'll own nothing and you'll like it. And then what is everything done as a result of the government's approach? Made us broker, ensured that we're going to have higher taxes, massive debt, likely inflation, but all those common threads is that they lead to more government dependence. They're telling me now, I would love to get back, and earn some extra money part-time right now, but it's not even that simple. I'm running Diverge Media. I do this full-time, but I would like to earn some part-time income. I can't, because then I might be subject, well, for sure, mandatory masking. You're not going to get a job without that now. You say, I can't wear a mask, guarantee you're not getting a job. And then PCR testing. A lot of places want you to be open to the testing. I'm not going to be open to that type of testing. And when you think about the Great Reset, every single thing that's being done right now, they're talking about, no new normal, and this is a great opportunity to build back better. And I just wrote an article the other day. Trudeau was at She 2021 talking about gender equality, and he was asked, do you think this is like never waste a good crisis, Justin, when speaking about gender equality and we can build back better and all this crap? Do you think this is like never waste a good crisis, Justin? And he goes, I think so. There's your prime minister. Like, that should be front page flipping news. CBC, CTV, Global, Rebel, Post Milan. The PM just admitted he thinks he should never waste a good crisis. He's telling you he's going to push through his agenda because COVID. He thinks it's a great opportunity. Like, the guy literally called it an opportunity in his question to Trudeau, and he says, I think so. Like, let me pull it up. It's literally an article I wrote a couple days ago. It just blows my mind, and I don't know what to think anymore. Like, I'll tell you this, it doesn't seem like our politicians are acting in the best interest of the nation anymore. It seems like they're either acting in their best self-interest, best case scenario, or perhaps in someone else's. And I don't know who that would be, but as Carlin says, George Carlin, comedian, talked about there's owners of the country. And I kind of do subscribe to that theory a little bit, that there is a powerful elite business interest and class that is in behind the scenes, that has influencers in with all the major political parties, and they just lobby, and the things that they don't care about, but the things that matter, and those things will get done and pushed through certain parties. I mean, like, we look at what's happening right now. We got Aaron O'Toole just hired a former Huawei executive after pretending to be hard on China. This is an example of a politician. I'm willing to say one thing and I'll do another. You're going to come out and we need to be hard on China and his CanZuck trade agreement that he proposed. And then you turn around and say, or turn around and hire the former CEO or vice president or something of Huawei. You kind of lose the higher ground. Haven't heard much about Italy in a while. Not sure what's happening there. I know last I checked, there was people starting to get vocal. Restaurants open. That was one of the things. There's over it was social media. They said there's going to be like 50,000 restaurants all opening up at the same time. They don't know if it was actually 50,000, but a great deal of them did open up together. There's video of an article I did a while back where police come in, try to shut down a restaurant, and they basically get heckled out of the restaurant and told to leave by the patrons there. No mask or anything like that. Everybody just eating their meals. But I hope this has been informative for everyone. The PCR test, I've known it's problematic for a long time, but then hearing that doctor talk about the coronaviruses in any hospital setting is like 5 to 14% on the low end, 7 to 15. And then you look at the FDA document, hey, this can pick up other bacteria and other pathogens, and you just get, real talk here. I guess, I'll give everyone here, you showed up for a midday live stream. I keep these a little more informal, especially when I just drop them. So I'll give you a little bit about myself. It's getting concerning. watching everything going on. I have 3 kids, another one on the way. I have 3 girls, another girl on the way. You know, I got a big family, and we're coming into a time I've never been more unsure of the future. I mean, fiat money is a big issue. The fact that we're printing money based on nothing. 1.2 trillion, I think, is the projected deficit. Eggs at the beginning of this, I just told my wife, eggs as an example, were $2.27 a dozen before we locked down in April. We're $3 a dozen last time I went to Walmart. 1 year. Okay, 70 cents. And that, as a percentage, is quite a bit. So what has it happened like on other groceries, the inflation? You can't do what we're doing and just pay people to sit at home and expect nothing bad to happen. And I'm very concerned about hyperinflation kicking in. And that's when the government will truly kick in the draconian shit. That's when the vaccine passports will come out. And because it will be when people are finally truly dependent on the government to eat and live, that's when I fear that they'll go, oh, now this is for sure you're doing this stuff or else. But I worry in general. I have my kids. I don't see a bright future at all, not under the current situation, but I do see a lot of people waking up. And if I'm going to take an optimistic look at the way things are going, I see so many people waking up all the time, getting vocal. And in context, the revolution in the United States was fought with roughly 3% of the population. So like, what if you had 10 or 15% of your population that was knowledgeable about what had happened, but also willing to be vocal in their day-to-day conversations? Like, you can change everything. Media is the new forum for war, in my opinion. Battles are being fought online on social media, and governments are vying for your attention and trying. English is a tricky language, and I see it all the time in things I read where there's double meaning in things, and people take it one way when it's really not what it says. And the other concern I see with media, with the concern focusing, they'll touch on big issues that matter, but it's one and done, or they touch it a few times. But it's basically, if here's the narrative that's like maybe the government narrative, right? And here's stuff that doesn't jive with that. I'm going to hit this stuff 150 times, and I'll hit this once or twice. And that's, in an essence, it's not lying, but it is a form of dishonesty because they're only telling one story the majority of the time. It's like, if you gave one politician coverage over another politician only, like you only ever showed Justin Trudeau and no other politician was allowed to ever show a message, of course Trudeau would be more liked than he currently is because he's going to have more. So it's the same principle. Yeah, the media was very different with the swine flu. They didn't hype it the same way at all. And there is definitely cause for concerns when it first started. Estimates of 200 to 500,000 deaths worldwide. Now, if they would have tested for swine flu like they have for coronavirus, I bet you it might have even been higher for deaths compared to coronavirus. 330,000 per million people. 330,000 tests per million people last I checked in Canada. Over that number. Imagine if we did influenza season like that, tested that much, what the numbers would come out looking like. But yeah, I don't know how everybody else is feeling, but it is something that's starting to weigh on me. Obviously, I've talked about it a bit, moving out to Saskatchewan, getting away from the urbanization and the concentrated populations, and just finding a place that I can actually afford to rent, live in, and hopefully save for a while and then buy a cheap home out in the prairies. I'm a country boy anyway, so I think it's going to be a good fit. But the future seems like it's slipping away. I'm a young man, but I got kids, and I think about it all the time. It's like the inflation really concerns me. The debt really concerns me. The obedience to the government, the ratting out neighbors, the children being scared of other children now because they might pass on something to someone, even if they're both healthy, that might hurt someone else that they love. It's like, I think about the consequences of these decisions all the time, and I'd be lying to my audience if I said it doesn't infuriate me. I sit here thinking about it all the time. I used to, months ago, I was so stressed about it that I'd read stories in the media and get to the point where I'd cry. You're just reading about the struggles that people are having, suicides and just certain things would trigger me. And I'm past that now, and I'm getting to a point where getting a bit hardened about it and I'm just fed up, I'm at angry, and I'm at the point where it's time to do something about it. We started a year ago, roughly a year ago, a year and a half. And we, in 2 months and 6 days, did our entire traffic of this year. People are paying attention. People are starting to wake up. People are sharing good information. People want to know, I call it the stories that slip through the cracks. That's how I like to envision Diverge Media, just in case you ever wondered. We cover the stories that slip through the cracks, stories that, it's a busy news cycle. I try to keep on all the main politics and stuff going on. There's a lot of stories from experts and politicians and social media influencers that they get missed. They slip through the cracks, and we try to pick those up. And just seeing the growth explode, like, people are waking up, they are listening, but we need to find a way to bring this information out in a way that's palatable, and that's where I'm working harder and harder all the time to do that. So here's a live stream. We're going to clip it up. I'm going to be putting out a video showing this data directly from the FDA, directly quoting it from the article. It'll be done. So if you want to share out the article and not a live stream, so there's certain people that won't sit down and listen if they don't know me. That should be out tomorrow, Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. I'll have a video out discussing the PCR test, the problems with it, and Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg's opinion of the matter. But, if I'm going to put my opinion on the record, Italy is at fault for the lockdowns of democratic nations. It was Italy's response that allowed the legitimization not only of the fear of the virus, but the legitimization for other democratic nations to approach this in that way, to lock down. And so I put the fault at their feet. But ultimately, it's on our politicians and it's on us now to continue talking about this. I don't know what else to say. I feel like when it comes to the COVID stuff, I feel like I've gotten everything out there that needs to be covered. My next step is actually going to be writing a book. For people that have been following Diverge Media, you know that I've written a ton of articles on COVID, a ton of different experts' opinions, a ton of different medical articles, and now's the time. I think I've written, like I said, the only thing I'm waiting for to come out to kind of round out my understanding of COVID and what has happened in the last year is the total mortality rates for the entire year, because we had 10 months and a week, I think, in the last one we did. And outside of that, excess mortality, there's not really much else. I mean, it's time to write a book. It's time to put all the information out. Carrie Mullis on the PCR test talking about this shouldn't be used to diagnose illness. And yet here we are. And then the Corman-Drosten protocol and everything that's happened that led us to here. The idea is to write alongside of my life and the process of me learning about these things as I came through them and write that in a book. Because I talked about this with our audience before, but at the beginning of all these lockdowns, we were scared like everyone else, like a lot of people were. My wife was pregnant, immune compromised at the time. And we had a midwife, we had the baby at home because we were fearful. And then new information came along and I learned about the infection rates among children being a lot lower. And it kind of seemed like it was more of an elderly issue. And I slowly came into this information, and the idea of the book will be to write about kind of my life experience at the time, and then kind of the and then here's the information, and it'll just be a small prelude, but I'm going to start cracking at a book. It doesn't feel like there's anything left for me to wait on for information other than excess mortality and suicide rates. That was the other one I meant to say. If somebody has reports, like official government reports for the suicide rates and excess deaths, feel free to send them, please. It would be great. divergemedia.ca or at Diverge Media News on Facebook. But that is the next step for me. I'm going to be working on that. It's going to be a lot of work, but I'm looking forward to it. And it will be an important tool, hopefully, that we can share with others to get out. The PCR test is more than problematic. It is the fundamental cornerstone that these lockdowns have been hinged on. And putting it blunt, we have destroyed our entire economy on the off chance that we may save a few thousand people today. We've risked millions of people tomorrow. That's putting the COVID narrative in a nutshell. And if you say that, you're heartless. You don't care about Granny, and nothing could be further about the truth. I'm just thinking about Granny's 10 years from now, 5-10 years from now. I'm thinking about our currency and being able to afford the healthcare system itself to provide those services. Big picture. But make sure you share this out. Below in the description, FDA, that is linked about the PCR test, the FDA document showing that it can pick up other bacteria, other pathogens, and it doesn't mean you're actually infectious. That's linked below. Share this live stream out. If you don't want to share the live stream out, wait till tomorrow and drop the video. Thank you for tuning in. And I'm just going to look and see if we have any questions from anyone in the audience, and we'll run it through. And if not, it's been great. What we got here? So we got Henry, so easily to manipulate PCR. That's why they use it. Yeah, the PCR test, I mean, the amplification levels, if it runs under 25, 70% chance they're infectious. But as we shown in the FDA doc, doesn't mean 70% chance infectious with COVID. It could be other viruses too, but 70% chance they're infectious. But again, in Canada, as we pointed out in our bombshell PCR article, 33 to 45 across Canada. And the documentation in there is linked as well. You don't have to take my word for it. You can go and check yourself. So what else do we got? They're not concerned with saving people. It's about the Great Reset. So this is what comes up all the time, and it's getting harder to ignore it. It's like it's a really bad analogy, but it's a lingering fart in the room at this point where, the Great Reset, you're like, man, I don't know. They talked about it and I could still smell it. They talked about the Great Reset and we still see these things coincide with the actions a lot. And then there's all these questions on too. Like, I want to know all the potential conflicts of interest from politicians and things like that. There needs to be full disclosure and investigation into anyone who has any decision-making ability in the process. Because as we discovered, reported on, Dr. Eileen Davila's husband has spoke at CV Update 2020. It's a cardiovascular event where he disclosed financial relationships with Pfizer, Bayer, there's a bunch of others. Here, I got to pull it up. Sorry, everyone. There's Pfizer, Bayer, AstraZeneca was the other one. Here, we'll just pull it up. Yeah, it says relationships with financial interest, research support. He received research support. This is the medical officer of Toronto's husband has received research support from AstraZeneca and Bayer, and he's received Speakers Bureau honoraria and consulting fees from AstraZeneca, Bayer, Boehringer Ingelheim, Lilly, BMS, Pfizer, HLS, Novartis, Sanofi, and Servier. So somebody that has financial relationships and has access to somebody who's locking down an entire city when they don't have to right now, right? They were told they can come out of gray lockdown zone or whatever and go in the red, and they're like, nah, let's keep it in. That's what they did. And then you find out her husband in June of 2020 spoke at CV Update 2020 and disclosed financial interest or financial relationships with Bayer, Pfizer, AstraZeneca. It's like, I don't know if it's conflict of interest, but the optics look terrible. So I put the fall at China's feet also. I mean, yes, I get it. But they did of all the nations that have been struggling, China benefited from all of this. This is what people seem to forget. And so they had a vested interest in getting people to be fearful of COVID. When everybody else locked down, they basically started back up. And though everybody else seems to be doing the GDP's down for almost every country in the G7, I think, and most developed nations, China's actually improved their GDP through 2020. I can't remember the report that came out of, so don't quote me, but you can look it up, see if you can find it. They definitely had incentive and they boosted the fear, and I think that's where the concern comes in. They had their campaign, bolting people in their doors, all that, and then Italy took the response they took. And I guess the next logical question would be asking, what are the ties between Italy and China, and was there any ties between any individuals at the top end who had decision-making ability? Because if that one nation triggered the entire democratic reaction across the world, and there's a Chinese influence there, then that needs to be explored. I'm not saying there is, but it needs to be explored and understood, every aspect of this. And that's the thing that needs to be pushed for more than anything out of this is we need to start pushing for accountability. We need to start pushing for full disclosure, financial interest, all these things. Like, what the hell's going on with Dr. Eileen Davila? Her husband has disclosed financial relationships with Bayer, AstraZeneca. Like, so the public should know what's in those disclosures. That shouldn't be disclosed closed information to the public. We should know. But here we are. Yeah, they had people falling in the streets, dropping dead, and they're blowing up the fear on that pretty hard with that music, like that throat singing almost, like kind of, yeah. Anyways, thank you for tuning in. I don't do these pop-up live streams very often, but if you're new to Diverge Media, and we have a pop-up live stream outside of Tuesday or Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, it's usually because I have some good information you're going to want to hear. So if you like what you heard today, make sure to share it out. If not, we have the same information coming in shortened form tomorrow in video form, 7 p.m. Eastern, and we'll see you then. Thank you. I'm Greg Staley signing out.